Hello and welcome to the Learning to Slay the Beast podcast, a resilience podcast where we talk about all the challenging things that we're working to overcome, like anxiety, health, and relationship issues. My name is Sarah. Hello and welcome to the Learning to Slay the Beast podcast. My name is Sarah and I'm happy to connect with you this week. This week, I am pleased to bring a guest that we've actually had on the podcast before. It's my second returning guest, so very exciting for me. Essentially, our guest this week is going to be speaking about her new book and also the podcast that she runs. So today I welcome Heather Hester. She was on episode 115, supporting LGBTQIA+ children and teens. And this week we are going to be talking, like I said, about her new book and her podcast, Just Breathe, Parenting Your LGBTQ+ Teen. This podcast is amazing. It provides information about parenting children and teens that are LGBTQIA+, and a lot of the issues that the community experiences at large. It is also not just for parents. I highly recommend this podcast for anybody that is in the teaching space, who works with children and teens, because it is so great at understanding the best way to communicate and different things that are going on in their lives. I've learned so much from her and her conversations that she engages in. She also blogs at www.chrysalismama.com. And as she talks about on the podcast, she's releasing a new book called Parenting with Pride, Unlearn Bias and Embrace, Empower, and Love Your LGBTQ+ Teen. It's launching into the world May 14th, but you can pre-order the book now. So I'm happy to bring you this conversation with Heather Hester.
Thank you so much for having me again. I am delighted to be on your show again.
I was so excited to have your availability again and get to talk to you a little bit more. I know you've got some really exciting things going on. So why don't we start with just a little bit? You can give a bit about your background and just how you got into podcasting and the topic of parenting LGBTQIA+ teens.
Absolutely. So in a nutshell, I have 4 kids. My oldest came out as gay when he was 16, so about 7 years ago, and realized as we were on the journey with him as parents and family, that we really had a hard time finding the support that we needed outside of kind of the national organizations that are available, like PFLAG and Trevor Project and GLAAD, who are all amazing. But finding that more like personal support and connection and just knowledge, we were really struggling to find. So after about maybe 2 years on the journey, I decided to kind of start putting everything together that we had learned and offering it up on a website. And then from there, I started the podcast. I started that about 4.5 years ago. And it's called Just Breathe, Parenting Your LGBTQ Teen. And it was, successful way beyond what I ever imagined it would be. I just really kind of started it to offer, information that we had gathered, and people really responded well to it. And it's been such a gift to, be able to continue offering information, and interviewing really interesting people, which again is even more information to be offering to the world and to parents and allies and people who are curious, just kind of being that, the voice out there. So that is how, that all started. And of course, in the midst of parenting, what has now become, 2 teenagers and 2 young adults, and 2 of them on their journey. So it's just been all around a gift, to be able to do this and to be able to connect with people.
Yeah, absolutely. And your podcast is just amazing. I know it's a top 1.5% podcast. So like when you say successful, super successful. And I think it's a combination, you have hit on a really key topic that a lot of people are interested in, but then it's also you like, it's so wonderful to listen to the podcast and hear you talk to people, and you're so genuine and wonderful. So I think it's
Aw.
very well deserved for sure.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you to say. It is really fun. And I think part of it is it's just so unexpected, and it's so unlike anything I ever thought I would be doing in a million years. I mean, I am absolutely never have been the one who wanted to be in any kind of like have attention on me or
Mm-hmm.
and that is for sure my husband. And so it's really just funny to me that doing this has become something that I just love so much and feel very comfortable doing. And then, of course, led to the opportunity to write a book, which has been such a gift as well. And I think part of it is having my entire family and my husband and my kids all involved in the process. So Connor, my oldest, has been on the podcast multiple times. He was nothing I ever share is without his knowledge or permission. People always ask that, so I always want to make that very clear that I'm not sharing.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, it's important.
And just was a big part of like writing this book with me, and him being vulnerable enough to say, yeah, it's fine to like share my story, right? I mean, a lot of this is his story that of course we also had our parallel journey, parallel experiences as humans, but none of us would have been on this journey and had the shifts and the changes and the evolution that we have without him. So
yeah, absolutely. Oh, that's great. So, I mean, that kind of jumps a bit to one of the questions I had in terms of the book. Is it focused for parents, or like with Connor's involvement, is there also kind of that aim that teens could be reading it as well? Just kind of wondered audience wise.
it is more for parents, and for, if you wanted to broaden that at all, caregivers, people who are curious how to support, a young person, whether they're in their coming out process, whether they are, far down the road on their process, have been out for a long time, and you just want to know how to be a good ally. That is really, that is who the book is for. I mean, I think Connor's involvement in it is more like, hey, I want to tell this particular story to get this point across. Is it okay? And how would you like for me to word it? And that's really where, his involvement came to play. But as far as being for teens, not so much, other than for them to say, hey, mom or dad, I'd like for you to read this.
Yeah, for sure. Or teachers, like I could see there being that as well, right? Like just
Absolutely.
as you said, caregivers in any way, for sure.
Right. Anybody who, is around young people and really wants to understand who they are and what this looks like, and ways that they can support better and ask, whether it's asking better questions or just being that quiet support or providing that space that they need to, figure out who they are or process whatever it is they're going through. Right. So, that's why I say, I know you're never supposed to say it's for everybody, but it is definitely for, a broader group. It could be for a broader group, I should say.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And so why don't you kind of just give us a quick overview of why, like sort of what's in the book, what maybe how it's laid out, like what can people expect if they do order the book? And the book, just so everybody, I know I'll talked about it at the top, but it's Parenting with Pride, Unlearn Bias and Embrace, Empower, and Love Your LGBTQ+ Teen.
Yes. So it's a mouthful for sure. It's funny. I will tell you a very funny story. So the title, Parenting with Pride, was kind of always the working title of the book. But my publisher, decided that they wanted to have a subtitle to it. And for the longest time, I could not remember the subtitle. So people would be like, "What is the name of your book?" And I'd be like, "Parenting with Pride." There's more to it, but I can't remember it. So yes, I do have to laugh whenever I say it now, because I'm like, okay, Heather, that really wasn't that hard. But for some reason I had this, like, it just stopped like a blank
Just
after
a block.
that.
Yeah.
And it's really, the subtitle is the four pillars that I
Okay.
have kind of built everything on. So a number of years ago on the website, and in my blogging and things that I did on the podcast, I started kind of building off of these four pillars, which are embrace, educate, empower, and love. And working through, so that's how the book is laid out. It's laid out, at the beginning with me telling our story and why I decided to write this book. And then it goes into these four pillars and how they really helps you learn how to support, whether it's your child, a loved one, a student, a human, right? And so the educate piece, as I was working through that and writing that pillar and writing the chapters for that pillar, what I really realized I was writing was unlearning bias, which, as you know, is kind of a buzz phrase, for lack of a better way of saying it. But I was like, this is such a great opportunity to talk about this, because I think it also can potentially have like a finger pointing feeling to it. And I was like, this is a great way to be like, hey, you know what? We all have biases. Like, it's not a, hey, you over there, you need to get over this. We all have our stuff that we have to unlearn, and it's going to be different for each person, but this is a great opportunity to do that, right? To say, well, this is what I learned, whether I was growing up or as a young adult, that perhaps isn't serving me very well anymore. And it's something that I really want to kind of shift the other direction then. And so there are 7 chapters within the Unlearn Bias pillar that help you do that. If any of these are kind of your particular flavor of bias, right? And I always say, a couple of these were mine. Like, this is stuff that I had to actively work through and learn. So by no means is this me sitting on some, pedestal saying, you all need to do better. Like, we all need to do better. So that's kind of the thing. And then I end it with the back of the book. I have a really, really in-depth glossary, because those are a lot of the questions that I receive a lot are, how to use pronouns, what do different words mean, why can't I say this word, right? So I do a pretty in-depth glossary at the very end.
Oh, that's great. So there's that extra learning piece that people can kind of go back to when they need to. And I think that's something, again, like that's so great about you. Like, when you listen to your podcast, you really get that idea that, you've just at times you're learning along with us, or you're learning along with everybody listening. And so I think that's really, it sort of makes it seem less judgmental, maybe, right? Like the way that you're coming at it.
Thank you. I'm glad that's the way it seems, because that's what I'm trying, that's what I want to be. And that's what I aim to, I want people to feel that, because I think in a lot of ways, it can be seen as being judgy, or people feeling that they are being judged when you're saying, hey, I want you to understand this, or I want you to, please think about this differently, or I want you to change, or, why can't you accept your child? Or, a lot of these, when you are advocating for young people, it can sound like you're being super critical, but that's not the feeling that I want people to have. I want them to feel like, hey, this is a messy process, and it's messy for all of us in different ways. So just be okay with being messy.
Yeah, and be open, like kind of that we're all learners sort of mindset. I think it
Correct.
makes it great. And so I guess I'm wondering, like, in terms of the motivation for the book, was it kind of just a natural progression from the podcast, or did you see again, like, ooh, there's maybe a space here that there needs to be more resources, or how were you coming at the book?
A little bit of both, actually. I had originally, I've always been a writer. Like, that's kind of how I had been in the world before.
Okay.
And it's something that I've always loved. And it was something that, I always thought, oh, someday I'd love to write a book. I had no idea what I'd write the book on, but that was always like one of those, like, I'd love to do that. And I've always been a big journaler. And I think that's why starting the website was such a natural thing, because I did keep all the things that I'd written down and kept. And so it just was like a natural, like, well, let's put this all into a website and start writing a blog. And then the podcasts, I write all of my solo episodes because I work so much better from writing things out. So it really was just kind of a natural, like, okay, this might be a great thing. And it was actually somebody who had approached me who was like, I think this is something that needs to be out there. What do you think about writing something that is really like a toolkit, like an in-depth toolkit for parents, really is what it ultimately is. And I was like, well, that's a good idea. I mean, there really isn't a lot, again, out there. So there's a lot of memoir and kind of from different spaces, but kind of like the podcast, like there's not a lot like it. So it's like, well, this is great. Yes, let's do it. Let's put this out in the world. Like, if I can be helpful, if I can help one person, if I can, support one young person, then yes, right? Like 1,000% so worth it. So that's kind of how it came about.
Oh, that's great. And how was the process? Was it long? Was it like eye-opening? How did you feel? I know when I worked on my book, I was like, wow, this is way harder than I thought.
Oh my gosh. I mean, yes, I feel like I'm still like in a little bit of recovery, to be honest. I really enjoyed writing. The editing process was tough. I mean, holy goodness. I learned a lot about myself in that process and how I handle situations that are really difficult coming at me. I learned to get up from my computer and walk away instead of like typing out an email that put all my feelings into it. There were many emails that I wanted to send that I then was like, delete. You know? But that was much, like, to your point, to what you said. Yes, way harder than what I expected it to be. I think also one of another reason it was difficult is I did not have like a writing group that I was part of while I was writing the book. And I didn't have a publicist or an agent or anything like that. And so I didn't have anybody that I could go to and be like, is this normal? Like, what am I supposed to do now? Like, what should I expect next? So I feel like the whole process I've been like, well, I don't know. I think this is supposed to happen. I don't know. So I would say that would be, my thing that I would definitely do differently should I write another book.
Yeah. And you'll have that, like, okay, this is how it went last time. This is the sequence. Like, there's all of that, right? Where you're like, oh, when does this happen? And
it's such a weird feeling. And then I think too, like, I maybe could attest to this as well, that, when you all of a sudden realize like, wow, I'm like not just on a podcast talking about this stuff in my life and stories, right? I'm putting this in a book and putting this out in the world. Like that's, whoa.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a huge accomplishment. It's great.
Oh, goodness. Thank you.
And you're almost there. It launches on May 14th, right?
It does. Yes.
Wow.
Yes. Which is just, I can't even believe it. So I'm very excited.
And do you have like anything planned around the launch that you're thinking in terms of like how to kind of get it to people?
I do. Yes. So I've been in the process of doing a couple of different things. I'm doing, speaking on a lot of different people's podcasts. So thank you again for having me to help get the word out. And a couple different articles and different publications and blogs. I've also done a lot with independent bookstores across the country. So that has been a really fun thing to do, to kind of get the word out, not just like in my area, but like across the country. So, and then, we'll see as we get into June, and the rest of the year, what I kind of decide to do from there with it. But
yeah, that sounds great. I'm sure it'll be, so it'll be at a very exciting time for you.
Yes, it is fun timing.
And good time, like, especially with the, kind of being past winter, you can sort of get out there and actually, and now that things are more back in person, you can do some of those opportunities as well. Exactly.
Yes. I'm really looking forward to that, and just really, and also, celebrating Pride Month with it. That was kind of my thing all along, was I want this to be out in time for Pride Month. And so I'm thrilled to be able to have it be out, and then to be able to really celebrate and go around talking about it during June. So.
Oh, that's great. No, that'll be so wonderful. I guess like in terms of, so you were on the podcast almost exactly 2 years ago, I think I interviewed you. And so I wondered, if you had any thoughts in terms of like what you've seen over the last 2 years, like sort of maybe additional issues that are coming up in terms of teens, things that parents or, caregivers, teachers should be watching out for.
Oh, wow. That's such a great thing. Such a great question. Yes, it's interesting. I just had interviewed for my podcast a couple of young people who are producing a podcast called I'm Feeling Queer Today. And it was such a lovely conversation. I learned so much from them, and just kind of who they are and what they're, kind of the bottom line of what they want people to know about them is that they're human, and that they're figuring things out, and that they do know who they are. And I think that is one of the bigger things that you kind of hear in a larger sense. A lot of their experience has been politicized. And so for us to be able to, help them get their voices out there to say, hey, they know who they are. Like, listen when they tell you, because they know, and they may be able to, they may still be like figuring things out and asking questions, but at the core, they just want us to see them, and to kind of hold that space for them to really figure out, like, do the nitty gritty figuring out. Right. So I'd say that's like one of the bigger things, and just like helping to, there's been a lot of, I think, effort to dehumanize. So I think, anyone who's, an ally, to really work on humanizing, right? Putting the faces and names and experiences back in there, so that we can kind of flip that narrative.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, I'm in Canada. It's maybe slightly a different climate up here right now. But yeah, it seems like we're constantly hearing of different things happening in the US. And so, yeah, I can imagine that's continued to be challenging over the last few years for sure.
Yes. Yes. I think that at least from the different hosts and friends that I have in Canada, you all have a, how do I say this? You're more curious. How about that?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. Yeah.
Is that a good way to say it? Yes. So thank you.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So yeah, you've got so much going on, and I guess I'm thinking, is there anything else kind of that you'd want to flag for parents in terms of, some of the key takeaways that you've had over the time of doing the podcast, which has been a while now, and then also the book, like things that you're just thinking you really want to hit home?
Yeah, they are definitely parallel lessons between the two of just the minute that I think that, oh my goodness, okay, I've got this. I've learned it. I figured it out. Something will happen that I'm like, okay, I haven't quite, I'm not quite there yet. Is so, just learning to be so much more flexible and willing to be like, okay, so I need to kind of back it up a few steps, ask some more questions. I'm still messing up over here. Like this, I need to work on, being more, deliberate about pronouns, right? Like, and asking and things that are not necessarily in our, our generation's, just natural state of walking through the world or existing in the world, right? Like things where we're like, okay, it's important to, how do we find out what someone's pronouns are? And being uncomfortable. I mean, I think that's kind of the thing I always go back to, like, okay, it's going to be uncomfortable, but that's okay. That means that I'm learning and I'm growing and never to, I don't even know what the word would be. I mean, I always say I'm not an expert. I'm just a couple of years ahead on my journey. Right. So just kind of always like keeping that in mind. Like there's always room to learn. There's always room to grow. Every single person is different. So every single person that I meet, I'm like, oh my gosh, like that, their experience is yet one more beautiful experience. And that's amazing. So I think that's, that's what I try to get across in the book. That's why I have, talk about the range of things that I talk about on the podcast, as well as, the range of guests that I have on the podcast, is really, that's kind of like the underlying message in all of that. So to sum that up in one word or one phrase would be, just be curious.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right, like on the podcast in particular, and I don't know if you speak to any of the interviews in your book or anything like that, but like you've had so many different people bringing very different stories and, like ideas, all the things, authors all over the place. So I think, you definitely keep everybody learning for sure.
Good. That is the goal. And you don't have to, you're not going to agree with everything, or there are going to be some things that feel way more uncomfortable than others, and that's okay. Right. I mean, that's kind of the point of it. So also something good to keep in mind.
And I think for parents, it's like, you maybe start to get more comfortable with your particular situation. But the great thing about the podcast is then, you're hearing about all these different situations and you can then start, to broaden your horizons a little bit more.
Exactly. Well, and I think it helps too with like conversations with your kids, right? And with your kids' friends, and kind of providing context to perhaps what someone else's experience is, or when your kid comes home and they say, so and so uses they he pronouns. Well, then maybe you have a better idea of what that
Mm-hmm.
how to use those pronouns when talking to their friend, or what that might mean for that friend. So yeah, I think it just all, hopefully that is at least that's the hope and why I do that.
Yeah, and I mean it's so because I know even my daughter is 10 and she is involved with theater, and so she works sometimes with older youth and teens. And so yeah, like she's started to meet different people that do go by they pronouns, and so having that awareness and being able to right away, have that understanding. And I think at any age, like I know sometimes parents think, oh, my children are, young, and maybe this is parenting teens. I don't need to think about that. But really, it comes forward in so many different areas. Yeah, I think people need the knowledge all the time.
They do. They really do. And our kids, I feel, are, and this is like a tribute to the parents. And I feel like, parents need to understand, like, you're doing a good job, because if your kid feels comfortable enough to come out to you or tell you, hey, these are my pronouns, and that's a compliment to you and the job that you're doing, because you've created, a place where they trust you and they feel safe and being able to share who they are. And that's a big deal. That's a really big deal. So, even if you feel like you've messed something up or you could have done something better, like, we all feel that way, right? I mean, nobody's perfect. So that's part of the, like, just let it be messy. Apologize when you mess up, move forward, ask questions. It's very exciting to be part of this.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, this was great. So I'm so excited to read your book, and I'm sure listeners are going to want to find out more about the website, the podcast. You're on Instagram. Do you want to share?
I'm on Instagram, yes. So on Instagram, I'm at Chrysalis Mama. Actually, on all platforms, that's my handle is at Chrysalis Mama. The website is chrysalismama.com. I do have a couple different freebies on there, so jump on if you're curious. The book is available for pre-sale right now, so you can go to
Oh, wow. Okay.
you can go to your favorite online bookseller, whether it's Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Bookshop. All of those are also linked in my website as well. There's a whole page for the book where you can learn more about it.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay, so people can pre-buy now. They can just get right on it.
Exactly. Yes. So it'll come to you on the 14th.
Yes. Okay, that's great. Oh,
Yeah.
Heather. Well, thank you so much for your time today. It was so good to catch up and hear about this great new endeavor that you have. I'm sure everyone's just going to love the book, and again, it's going to provide such good information for parents.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. It was so much fun to talk to you again. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much to Heather Hester for this conversation today. I really enjoyed connecting with her again. I could just talk with her all day, and that's partly listening to her podcast. I could just honestly listen all day. She is just such a wonderful advocate for the LGBTQIA plus community and for our children and teens. And I think that's just amazing work that she's doing. So you're absolutely going to want to pick up her book, Parenting with Pride, Unlearn Bias and Embrace, Empower, and Love Your LGBTQ plus Teen. As I mentioned, and she mentioned in the podcast, it's out May 14th, but you can pre-order now. So anybody who is involved in the life of children and teens, whether you're a parent or an ally to the LGBTQ LGBTQIA+ community, please pick up this book and let's support Heather in her endeavors. Thank you so much for listening this week. It's been a great week. In Ontario, Canada, we are experiencing spring, so I love that. And if you do have any ideas for upcoming podcasts, feel free to reach out to me at reallifeprojectco at gmail.com or through Instagram at Sarah Lady Gluten. Thanks a lot and have a great week. Thank you for listening to the Learning to Slay the Beast podcast. Please keep in mind, this podcast is not intended to be medical or professional advice. If you'd like to hear more from me, you can follow me on social media, Instagram and TikTok at Sarah Lady Gluten, or Facebook, Sarah_gluten-free lady. You can also visit my website, which includes author information, speaking information, and more info on the podcast at www.se-german.com. If you like the podcast, please feel free to review the podcast on your favorite platform and also subscribe because it means that it will show up for you every week on your favorite podcast platform. Also, we've just started to have the ability to support the podcast. You can find this link in my Instagram bio or visit Ko-fi, ko-fi.com/learning to slay the beasts. Thanks again for listening and have a great week.